Good afternoon. Welcome to the Bob Unger Show. And we're very privileged today to have as our guest Alex Newman, who does so many things. It's hard to remember them all. So Alex, why don't you just tell us a little summary of your functions these days?
Well, thank you very much for having me, Bob. It's great to be with you. And I always say I wear so many hats that it looks ridiculous, and I don't wear any of them particularly well. But I'm the senior editor at the New American Magazine. I'm the editor-in-chief of LibertySentinel.org, which I founded. I'm a contributor to the Epoch Times. I'm the executive director of Public School Exit, which is a new ministry to help liberate as many children as possible from the clutches of the indoctrination centers posing as schools. And that's a brief overview. I do a whole lot more things on top of that, but that'll give you kind of a summary of what's important, maybe.
And what do you do when you're actually working?
Right. I don't do much of that.
Well, Alex is here to talk about a very important topic that unfortunately not too many people know anything about. In fact, the New York Nazi Times recently called it a conspiracy theory, which is pretty funny because when the conspirators actually tell you what they're going to do, how can it be a theory? It's like if Hitler told you he's an anti-Semite, I think you can believe him. And yet people will say, oh, Hitler, that's a conspiracy theory. And many people, by the way, did. Back in the 30s, when Jabotinsky was warning people to get out before they're killed, they thought, you know, he was an extremist, he was an alarmist, he was a pessimist, he was a cynic, he was negative. So Alex just reports the truth from the words of the people he's accusing. They call that in law an admission against interest. And yet people will say that's a conspiracy theory. So give us a little background on the Great Reset, what it is, what its goals are, and who's behind it.
Yeah, well, thank you, Bob. And this is such an important subject. If these globalists get away with it, this means literally the transformation of everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. They asked Klaus Schwab, the founder and the chief of the World Economic Forum, which is leading the push for this, what was the most important thing that would need to be transformed as part of the Great Reset? And he points at his head. He says, your mindset, right? So even the way you think, even your thought process is subject to the control and manipulation of these globalists in their nightmarish vision for this Great Reset. But anyways, to tell it as they explained it, they actually had a meeting. It was almost completely unreported in the United States. Aside from my articles in the New American and some videos we did on YouTube, there was almost not a peep about it in America. But it was a big deal. They brought together the head of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, who used to run the Socialist International. They brought together the head of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, a Bulgarian communist backed by George Soros. They brought together Prince Charles, the heir to the British throne, and Klaus Schwab. These were the four big ones. And they kind of laid out their vision for this new world order involving the Great Reset. They said, hey, the COVID is a disaster. We accidentally burned down all of your economies in responding to this. And so now we're going to build back better. We're going to rebuild everything, but on new foundations. There's going to be a new social contract. Business will have to operate differently. No longer will business be concerned with earning profits and satisfying consumers so they can make money for shareholders. Now they've got to consider all these nebulous, central planning established goals like environmental and social and governance. They call it ESG. So all these, nebulous targets that they're supposed to meet other than just making money and satisfying the consumer. And they get into, we need to transform education. We need to move away from the nation state. We need to just completely change everything. And I'm actually writing an article right now for the Epoch Times about what's coming in education. They're talking about really sidelining teachers and bringing in artificial intelligence and algorithms and computer programs to indoctrinate the children. So it's a total transformation of everything. And then they added a little bit more insight. After those four major speakers had talked, the head of the UN, the head of the IMF, Klaus Schwab, and Prince Charles, they brought in 9 lesser speakers to talk about this. They had a member of the Communist Chinese Party. They had the CEO of MasterCard. A big part of this is we're going to move to a cashless society, a global currency. And so the credit card companies are just salivating at the thought of making 2% fee on every transaction that takes place. And they brought together, some of the ones that really stuck out to me. They had the CEO of a South American company called ChipSafe. And this company manufactures implantable technology that you put in your livestock that tracks their geolocation using GPS. It can tell you where all your animals are, tracks the health of your animals, and collects all this data and sends it to a satellite so you can process it in your computers. And I'm pretty sure they didn't bring out ChipSafe because they want us all to chip our animals and our livestock, right? When you listen to Klaus Schwab, he says one of the key components of this great reset is going to be what he calls the fourth industrial revolution. And he's spoken and he's written very extensively about this fourth industrial revolution. The critical component of this, as he explains it, is actually the merger of man and machine. So if you don't mind, Bob, before I hand it back to you, let me share my screen here and people will be able to see for themselves what I'm talking about here. This is really incredible. And he's saying it openly. So we'll take a look here and see what the deal is. So let me share my screen. We'll show this on video for people to be able to see. So this is Klaus Schwab here, and he is talking about this fourth industrial revolution, which again is a critical part of the Great Reset. Listen to what he says here.
It's at the end, what the fourth industrial revolution will lead to is a fusion of our physical, our digital, and our biological identities. When I wrote the book, I started to write it for years ago. It was published 3 years ago. It was sold very interesting over 1 million times in the world. And what is interesting is that 800,000 copies, more than 800,000 copies of those.
Anyways, it goes on and on and on, but it's I mean, right there, you have it, right? This is an effort to totally transform everything. And if you don't like it, well, tough, right? They're talking about creating this new global world order, and these people are dead serious about their plan. So
for those who didn't understand what they just heard, explain it a little bit more in terms of transhumanism and what transhumanism is.
Yeah, so transhumanism is basically this idea that man needs to merge with machine. And so that's literally what they're talking about. They're talking about fusing mankind with technology. And they're already trotting out examples of this, right? For example, at the World Government Summit that they held in Dubai or in the United Arab Emirates not that long ago, they actually brought in this self-proclaimed cyborg, and this cyborg it was pretending to be at least a hybrid of a man and a machine. He had an antenna sticking out of his head. He was the head of the Cyborg Society, and he said, "Look, in the future, you're all going to have to be cyborgs. If you won't get upgraded with technology, then you're going to be like deficient. You're going to be handicapped, and so eventually, all of us are going to have to merge with machine." And they've gotten really bold about this, Bob. Just in the last few weeks, you probably saw Elon Musk announce that he wants to start putting brain chips inside people's heads. He's going to saw open a piece of your skull and stick a chip in and fuse it with your brain and then super glue your skull back together. I mean, this is what these people are saying in public. So imagine what they're talking about behind the scenes. This is a very, very dangerous idea that they're talking about. And I think a lot of these people are crazy enough to think that they're going to get eternal life by like uploading their consciousness to a computer system. It's that loony, but that's what they're going. That's where they're going with this.
I think they refer to what we might call the soul. I think they call it their essence. Have you ever heard that term?
Yep.
So they think that they can use a computer and download your essence into some kind of a machine. I got a feeling that God is going to download their essence to a very warm place.
Yeah, and I agree. I think God is not going to tolerate these crazy ideas for too much longer. I mean, they're openly talking about. Bill Gates is now talking about we're going to modify your DNA with these vaccinations. I've got videos of him saying in public that he's planning to alter our genetic code under the guise of protecting us from COVID. And I think, well, I'm pretty sure God knows more about what my genetic code should look like than Bill Gates. And so actually, I'm quite happy with the genetic code that God gave me. I don't need your alterations. Thank you very much. But I mean, this is the wacky world that they're getting into. And Bill Gates actually wrote an article in the mouthpiece of the Council on Foreign Relations where he explained that it was headlined Gene Editing for Good. And he explained that we now have this technology that will allow us to modify the genetic material, not just of plants and animals, but even of human beings. Incredibly dangerous stuff these people are talking about. And they're doing it in the open now, which in my opinion is very troubling.
This great reset that they talk about, it seems to have a plethora of categories in which it's going to operate on a biological basis, on a surveillance basis, and also on a monetary basis. Talk a little bit about the economic and monetary aspects of this.
So that is one of the big components, and there's several things that are happening in tandem. One of them is the move away from cash. They are bound and determined to move us toward a cashless society because everything can be tracked, everything can be controlled. I mean, there's a whole bunch of reasons. I think the war on privacy is probably one of the most significant ones. Once they get rid of cash, you cannot buy or sell anything without permission from your overlords. And if you make them really mad, they might shut you off, right? We see PayPal deplatforming people. We see credit card companies, banks saying we won't take you as a customer anymore because you have political views we don't agree with, or you manufacture firearms and we don't like firearms. What happens when there's no more cash and you literally have no other option? Well, then the big problems begin. Plus, there's a permanent record of every transaction you ever engage in. Everything you buy and sell will be tracked. All that data will be fed into algorithms. They'll know you better than you know yourself. So the cashless society is very dangerous. And you know just as well as I do, Bob, that these lunatics running the central banks, they are dying to give us negative interest rates. Right? They can't drop interest rates any lower because people will just take their money out of the bank and hide it under the mattress. Well, how do you get around that? You make sure people can't take their money out of the bank. You say no more cash. You must keep your money in the bank. And if you don't spend it, we're going to deduct 2%, 3%, 8%, whatever it is per month. We'll give you your universal basic income, which is a big part of this great reset. They want us all dependent on the government, like we get allowance, like we're little children. And if we don't spend our allowance, then they'll suck it back. And you combine that with some of the other things that are coming on the economic front. For example, Klaus Schwab has talked about how we're not going to own anything in this new order that they're building. Everything will be rented. No more private property. If you need something, you can rent it temporarily. You'll get an Uber rather than have your own car, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a big part of it. You have the global currency component. We've been writing about this at the New American for decades. In fact, The Economist did an incredible cover story. The Economist is one of the big mouthpieces for the Bilderberg. They're more overrepresented at Bilderberg than any other publication. And they had a cover story in 1988. This was a couple years after I was born, with a big phoenix rising out of the ashes of burning dollars. And they said, something about welcome to a global currency. And they predicted that it would be coming within 40 years or so. So we're almost there. And now we have the International Monetary Fund, which is openly participating and promoting this great reset, bragging about how they're creating special drawing rights. This is the proto-global currency. It's an international, they call it a reserve asset based on a basket of national currencies, including the dollar. And yet when they create this out of thin air, mind you, just like the Federal Reserve prints dollars, they create these SDRs, as they call them, and then they give them to other governments who are members of the IMF, and then those governments can trade those SDRs for US dollars or for euros or for yen or for whatever the case may be. So they're moving us very quickly now in the direction of a global currency, a cashless society, and this total transformation of the way that business is done. I mentioned earlier, they don't want businesses to just be pursuing profit. They've actually resurrected this idiotic communist slogan about people before profits, right? As if you could make profits without satisfying the needs and the wants of people who have to be willing to give you money. But it's incredible what's happening. And I think the easiest way to explain it, Bob, is to say they want a global technocracy. They want the system that exists in communist China, which is not really even communism anymore. It's just this freakish hybrid of totalitarianism mixed with market signals that make it, not implode in on itself. And they want that for the whole world. An end to individual liberty. All economic activity is centrally directed from the ruling elites. And that's what they want at the global level.
Makes sense. I think the underlying problem here in trying to alert people to this and get them to understand it is what I think it was Goebbels, but it was definitely one of these Nazi creeps that made the statement that a normal evil has to be very carefully hidden, such as, let's say, a guy is looking at a woman who's not his wife in a prurient manner. That's more of a normal evil. That people can believe. People know that people commit adultery quite commonly. And so if you say your neighbor is committing adultery, it's not considered outlandish. It's not considered a conspiracy theory. But if you say that your neighbor is planning on controlling the entire world and perhaps murdering 1 billion people, that's not a normal evil. And so that doesn't have to be hidden, because it's automatically, de facto, it is hidden by the inability of people to believe it. Kind of like what is written in the Screw Tape letters, that the greatest thing the devil does is make you think he doesn't exist. And so because people who no longer are biblically based, and I'm talking about the majority of people, they can't think in this way anymore. As a matter of fact, they can't think, to be quite frank. But what do you think about that concept?
It's absolutely true, Bob. It's a brilliant piece of insight. And you're right. Goebbels talked about that. If it's a small lie, people can believe that their leaders would make a small lie. But when you're talking about the big lie, something that's just so outrageous, people are just incredulous, because your average person can't. Your average person can do bad things. Your average person might lie. Your average person might embezzle a little bit of money at work. Your average person might cheat on their wife, or even more serious things. They might do some kind of crime. But your average person isn't really interested in enslaving huge numbers of people, much less the whole globe, or massacring huge numbers of people and kind of proclaiming himself a god with a little g. Your average person is not interested in that. And so your average person doesn't imagine that other people might be interested in that. Now, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that people are interested in that. All you have to do is look around the world, look back through human history. You've got the Adolf Hitlers, the Joseph Stalins, the Vladimir Lenins, the Pol Pots, the Chairman Maos, the Fidel Castros, the Saddam Husseins. I mean, there's just a never-ending list of psychopaths whose end goal in life was to be kind of the overlord for as large of a segment of the population as they could. And we would be absolutely idiotic. We would be naive in the extreme to believe that for some reason those people don't exist in America, that for some reason we're immune to these horrible elements of human nature that have plagued human societies going back thousands of years from the dawn of time. And yet your average American is oblivious to this, because they didn't learn it in their schools. They don't think outside the box. They don't know much about real history. They know almost nothing about what's going on in the world. They just, exist in the TV bubble where, okay, maybe a politician embezzled some money. Maybe he cheated on his wife. But, certainly they're not trying to enslave us and get rid of us. But that's, once you get over that hurdle and you realize that this kind of evil does exist in the world, and that people really do want to enslave you and build a totalitarian global system, then suddenly everything makes sense. Suddenly all these actions, all these things that seem unrelated, why are they lying to us about climate change? Why are they rigging our elections? Why are they doing this, that, and the other? Well, then it all makes sense. There's a unifying theme behind all of it. And the Great Reset, I think, is the most brazen example that I've seen in my lifetime. I mean, this is worse than when George H.W. Bush came out in 1991 and said, hey, guys, we're going to have a new world order where we're going to use the UN's military to bring about the vision of the UN's founders. I mean, they're just going full blown now and telling us that they are going to overturn and micromanage every element of our lives, of our businesses, of our families, of our school systems, of our governing systems. It's and it's right there in your face, but people don't see it.
Well, let's try to go through the stages of what they're going to do. You've touched on many different aspects, so let's give people kind of a point-by-point agenda of what the enemy's agenda is. And I'm referring to the enemy of the Bible and the physical enemy we're talking about on this earth. So let's take it step by step, just so we can have a point-by-point summary. Go
Well,
ahead.
I think the next critical thing in this process, Bob, is to finish destroying the middle class. I think that's a big part of what this COVID insanity is about. They're not really worried that you're going to catch a virus and die, right? I mean, the data is crystal clear. You, especially if you're, younger, you're more likely to get struck by lightning and die than to get COVID and die. It's preposterous that we need to shut down our entire society over this virus. But it does have a really important benefit from the enemy's perspective, and that is you strangle what remains of the middle class. You make people desperate. And when we're seeing this, they talk about economic lockdowns and shutdowns. It's not really an economic lockdown or shutdown because the big boys are making gazillions of dollars, right? Jeff Bezos, I think, is a perfect example of this. He owns these he owns the Washington Compost, for example. And the Washington Compost is sitting there shouting and screaming about how we're all going to die from COVID. And these governors, these Republican governors who don't go along are committing human sacrifice. They just don't care about human life. Meanwhile, the owner of this propaganda machine called the Washington Compost is doubling his money. The share, I own some shares in Amazon. They've increased by 100% since this lockdown idiocy happened. So mom and pop shops are being shut down, small businesses, small restaurants, antique, all these little businesses, these backbones of our community that mom and pop have invested their life savings in, they're all going bankrupt. They're not going to come back because they've been shut down for months. They couldn't pay the rent on their building. They couldn't pay their suppliers. These people are going to be financially destroyed. But not everybody's being financially destroyed. People like Jeff Bezos have doubled their wealth. Elon Musk is, of course, making a huge amount of money. All the big Walmart. I mean, my shares in Walmart have gone up 50% since this lockdown started because you only have to shut down. Apparently, COVID only spreads in small businesses, not in big businesses like Walmart. Same thing with the churches, right? They are absolutely destroying churches. I've seen data now that probably 1 in 4 churches in America will never reopen again as a result of this COVID insanity. So what are they doing here? They're destroying the middle class. They're destroying small businesses. They're destroying ranchers. They're destroying farmers. They're destroying churches. They're destroying the infrastructure that supports the independent American. And they're moving us all toward a system where you'll either work for Walmart or you'll work for the government or you'll work for Amazon. And what happens then? Well, then you can bring in the technocracy. Then you can order people to do all the things you want them to do. So I expect that we will see in the probably not too distant future a dramatic devaluation of the US dollar, an economic calamity like that will I think will make the Great Depression seem small by comparison. If you just look at the data that we've seen since the start of the shutdown, the data is already really bad. They've already been able to kind of paper over it for a little while using the Federal Reserve and the printing of money, and the dollar still has value. We can buy stuff from other people in other countries. But at some point, the musical chairs will be exposed. There's not enough chairs for everybody to sit down in. The consequences are going to be incredibly negative. And at that point, once people are desperate, once people are starving, once there's riots and there's looting and there's just this desperation for a return to normalcy, then they can step in and say, oh, don't worry, we'll just do a great reset and we'll give everybody a universal basic income so you don't have to worry about having food. All you got to do is just accept your digital dollars, right? You got to hand in all of your cash. You can't have any more firearms. By the way, no more private property ownership. Don't worry. We'll get rid of your mortgage. We'll get rid of your credit card debt, but you can't own stuff anymore. Sorry about that. So that's the direction they're going. And they've already laid this path out clearly. I'm not speculating here. They've said that this is where they want to go. They've said that the economic calamity that's coming is going to be the catalyst for bringing this about. And so I think that's the next step here, is to really destroy the U.S. economy. Maybe if they're fortunate, blame Donald Trump for having done it. Say conservatives and people who oppose globalism are to blame for this, when really it was the Federal Reserve. That's their plan. Whether they get away with it or not, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know whether they will or not, but I think that's what they're planning, and that's what they've told us they're planning.
Did you see what Mad Dog Mattis had to say yesterday?
What a disgrace.
The guy that all the Trumpsters thought was so great at him. And he said that the problem is we have to get rid of America first.
Yep.
There you go. There you go.
And there's kind of a double entendre there too, right? Not just the America First political slogan. We've got to get rid of America first.
First. Right,
before we can do this.
Exactly. That's a good one. I like that.
Yep.
Quick.
But that's what they're up to. That's what they're up to. And they've been very bold about this. David Petraeus, member of the Bilderberg, member of the
David
Council on Foreign
Petraeus.
Yeah, exactly. And he's been saying for years now, we have to move past this concept of America. Now we need to move into the age of North America. We need to integrate with Mexico and Canada so we can be competitive with the European Union and the Eurasian Union that Putin is building. It's so clear what they're doing, and you and I know all this, Bob. You and I we've read how all this works, and I could have told Donald Trump from the beginning, don't hire. I hate to say I told you so, but every single one of these swamp creatures. And I would tell like friends and family, oh no, this guy's bad news. How do I know? I'm not a mind reader. I just look at the list of the Council on Foreign Relations. Okay. You don't have to be a genius to figure this out. And, oh no, Trump, you don't think Trump knows what he's doing. Trump is playing 5D chess. He knows much better than you do. And yet every single one of these guys, John Bolton, David, what's his name? Mattis, Mark Esper. Exactly.
Yeah.
All these guys.
Mnuchin.
McMaster. The list is almost endless.
I want to just mention, because we're going to have to start shutting the interview down on the time. I wanted to mention that if you look on YouTube, the Great Reset actually has a little commercial. And it says in the commercial, you'll own nothing, you'll rent everything, but you'll be happy. So you're not going to own anything, but you're going to rent everything, but you'll be happy. Now, this is perfect communism. I just listened to two great guys last night, Michael Maloney and George Gammon. In fact, I'm working on getting George Gammon for an interview. And I love what Michael Maloney said last night. And it was brilliant and so obvious that I didn't even think of it until he said it. He said, wait a minute, how could you own nothing and rent everything if nobody owns anything? Because in order to rent something, you got to rent it from somebody who owns it. So I guess the owners are going to be these globalist bums, and we're going to be the renters subsisting on universal basic income. And the other thing I wanted to ask you about, and this jumped up to me when you were speaking earlier, getting rid of teachers. How are they going to bribe the teachers union to accept that? Do you have any theories or ideas?
Well, so far they're keeping this concealed from the teachers. That we're not going to replace you. We're just going to supplement you. Right? We're just going to help you with this AI. But you're exactly right, Bob. What you just said about Maloney, I mean, that is hitting the nail on the head. I've got a book behind me here. I know you know which book I'm talking about. It's Tragedy and Hope by Carol Quigley, Bill Clinton's mentor. And in there, I mean, this guy kind of brags about being part of the deep state. Oh, I've been close to them for 20 years, and I've even had the opportunity to examine their papers for a few years. And I agree with them. My chief difference of opinion, he says, is that they want to remain secret. I think they ought to be known. And what he says in there about their overall objective, in plain English, he says they want to build a world system of financial control in private hands that is able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. And then he says, the money quote, the new system will be based on feudalism. Okay, for the people who maybe slept through third grade civics, feudalism was the economic system they had in Europe, where you owned nothing, right? The peasant class, the serf class, owned literally nothing. The lords, if they were generous, they'd let you have a little plot of their land. You never owned it, you simply rented it. You could farm on a little plot of their land as long as you surrendered 50% or 60%, or depending on the lord, maybe 40% of everything you produced. You gave that to your lord. And if the lord became displeased with you, boom, you're done, right? No, you have to go find some other lord whose generosity you can depend on. That's the system they're rebuilding here. Our overlords will own everything. We will own nothing. We will exist by their good graces if we behave ourselves. The social credit system in China, too, is a big component of this. They don't even want to have to use brutality and terror to keep us under control. They expect that we will keep ourselves under control because Facebook and Twitter will censor us and the credit card companies will stop processing our orders. This is a return to feudalism, just with some high-tech gadgets and contraptions and algorithms thrown in to make it a little bit more efficient.
Yeah, well, it's funny. You're talking about the serfs and the feudalism. That's why Hayek's book is called The Road to Serfdom, which we're definitely, it sounds like a Willie Nelson song, right? On the road to serfdom, on the road again. Anyway, to sum up, thank you very much for being here. A lot of elucidation of a lot of topics. Tell the viewers how they can learn more about what you do and get access to your writings and materials and videos or whatever else, give them a few places to go to learn more.
Well, thank you so much, Bob. I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate everything you do. I really do think you're one of the most brilliant and incisive minds in our country today, and wish we had a lot more people like you. If people want to learn more,
Did you know my mother? Did she tell you that?
No. But no, it's true. You have insight into these things that very few other people have, and you have the courage to speak about it, which even a lot of the people who do have the insight don't have the courage and the backbone to speak publicly about it and to be bold about it. So I appreciate you very much, Bob. If people want to find more, you can go to libertysentinel.org. That's my personal website. You can subscribe to the New American Magazine. I'm the senior editor here. It's upside down. It's a great magazine. You get 2 every month delivered straight to your door, and the big tech boys can't censor it. I write for the Epic Times now. You can subscribe to that. You get it weekly at your door, or if you live in New York or one of the big cities, you can get it on the streets. And yeah, if you follow me on social media, I haven't been banned from Twitter yet. I am temporarily banned from Facebook, but I'm also on all the new ones, Parler, Minds, MeWe, etc. And yeah, I hope to hear from people. And I thank you once again for having me, Bob. Always a pleasure.
All right. Likewise. Good to hear from you, and we'll stay in touch.
Excellent. Thank you, Bob.
Okay.